Very urgent. Your soulmate needs to explain what happened this afternoon. Something shifted this afternoon in a way no one could have predicted. It began with a single message that was never sent, a phone held tightly in trembling hands, and a long pause that seemed to stretch far beyond a few ordinary minutes. Somewhere, someone who has been carrying your name quietly in their heart suddenly realized they could not keep pretending everything was fine. But why did this moment become so important? And what happened between sunrise and sunset that now feels impossible to ignore? Stay with this, because one small detail changes the meaning of everything you thought you knew. Earlier today, your soulmate walked into what seemed like an ordinary afternoon. The streets looked the same. The conversations sounded familiar. Even the sunlight felt calm. Yet beneath that peaceful surface, something unexpected was unfolding. A simple question from someone close to them stopped them completely. Are you really going to let this story end without saying what you truly feel? Those words lingered long after the conversation ended. They smiled on the outside, but inside, memories began rushing back all at once. Moments they tried to forget returned with surprising clarity. The laughter they still remembered. The silence they regretted. The opportunities that slipped away because fear spoke louder than honesty. There is one piece of this afternoon that almost nobody would notice, but once you see it, every decision they made afterwards suddenly makes sense. Don't drift away now, because the next few moments reveal why they suddenly felt an overwhelming need to explain everything. As the afternoon continued, they found themselves standing alone, watching people pass by without really seeing them. Time seemed slower. Every notification made their heart race, only to leave them disappointed a second later. Then something remarkable happened. They overheard a conversation that had nothing to do with them, or so it seemed. Someone nearby said, "The biggest mistakes are usually the words we never say." It was an ordinary sentence, spoken casually, but it landed with extraordinary force. They couldn't shake it. It echoed through every thought until avoiding the truth was no longer possible. In that instant, they understood that explanations delayed too long often become mysteries that hurt more than reality ever could. They whispered your name under their breath, not because they expected you to hear it, but because saying it aloud finally felt honest. Before you move on, notice this unexpected turn. They weren't searching for the perfect excuse anymore. They were searching for the courage to tell you exactly what happened this afternoon, even if it meant revealing emotions they had hidden for far too long. And just when they decided they were finally ready, someone unexpected appeared, changing the direction of the entire story. The person who stepped into their path wasn't a stranger at all. It was someone who knew them well enough to recognize the expression they had been trying so hard to hide. One glance was enough. "You've been thinking about them again, haven't you?" the voice asked gently, almost as if the answer had been obvious all along. Your soulmate tried to laugh it off, but the smile disappeared before it could fully appear. There was no pretending anymore. For the first time in a very long while, they admitted that this afternoon had changed something inside them. They confessed that every plan they had made for moving forward suddenly felt incomplete because one important conversation had never happened. As they spoke, they realized they weren't explaining their feelings to the other person, they were rehearsing the words they wished they could say directly to you. Stay with this, because the next discovery reveals why they couldn't walk away anymore. Their friend listened without interrupting, then quietly asked a question that froze the entire moment. If you had one chance to tell them the complete truth today, what would you say before the sun goes down? The silence that followed carried more emotion than any speech could have. Instead of answering immediately, your soulmate looked toward the fading afternoon sky, took a slow breath, and finally admitted that what happened today wasn't an accident at all. Every unexpected conversation, every delay, every reminder had been pushing them toward one unavoidable decision: to stop hiding behind uncertainty and explain everything honestly. And while they stood there gathering courage, they reached for their phone again, opened your conversation, typed several heartfelt lines, then stopped with their thumb hovering over the send button, wondering if this single choice could change both of your futures forever. What happened next surprised even them. They didn't delete the message this time. Instead, they kept reading it over and over, changing only a few words, not because they wanted it to sound perfect, but because they wanted every sentence to sound genuine. Then another memory interrupted them, a quiet afternoon from long ago when everything between you seemed easier, lighter, untouched by hesitation. That memory wasn't painful, it was comforting. It reminded them of the version of themselves who wasn't afraid to be honest. That's when something remarkable became clear. The explanation they had been preparing wasn't really about defending their actions. It was about helping you understand the thoughts they had never shared. There is one tiny detail you haven't noticed yet, and it changes everything. Throughout this afternoon, every conversation somehow led back to you. A passing couple laughing together. A familiar song playing softly from a nearby cafe. Even a stranger smiling while reading a heartfelt message on their phone seemed to whisper the same quiet lesson: meaningful connections deserve honest words before silence grows too heavy. If this story has drawn you in, consider sharing it with someone who believes timing can change lives, and let us know in the comments what part has touched you the most. Your thoughts might encourage someone else who is waiting for the courage to speak from the heart. But don't leave yet, because the most unexpected part of this afternoon was only beginning to unfold. Just as your soulmate gathered enough confidence to press send, the phone rang before they could touch the screen. The unexpected call wasn't dramatic or alarming, yet its timing felt almost impossible to ignore. They answered quietly, listened for several moments, and with every passing second their expression softened into something no one around them had seen in months. When the conversation ended, they smiled, not the polite smile they showed the world, but the kind that comes from finally understanding something important. They realized they had spent too much time worrying about how their explanation would be received instead of simply telling the truth with sincerity. That realization lifted an invisible weight from their heart. The afternoon that had begun with uncertainty was now becoming a turning point they would remember for years. Before this chapter closes, there's one final moment you need to see. They looked at your unfinished message one last time, stopped changing the words completely, whispered, "This is finally enough," and slowly moved their finger toward the screen. In that quiet second, with the sun beginning to disappear beyond the horizon, they made a choice that would quietly reshape everything waiting on the other side of today. And what happened immediately afterward is something neither of you could have predicted. Just when it seemed the moment had finally arrived, something beautifully unexpected slowed everything down. Their finger hovered over the screen for only a second, but that second felt endless. Instead of rushing, they closed their eyes and quietly asked themselves one question they had avoided for far too long. If these words reach them today, will they finally understand what this afternoon truly meant? That question changed the entire direction of their thoughts. They didn't want to send a message filled with confusion or unfinished emotions. They wanted every sentence to carry clarity, warmth, and honesty. So they opened a blank note instead and began writing everything they had never found the courage to say. The words flowed naturally, almost as though they had been waiting for this exact afternoon to be released. They admitted the smiles they forced when they were hurting. They admitted the moments they wanted to reach out but convinced themselves to stay silent. They admitted that every time they imagined moving forward without explaining themselves, something inside refused to let go. Stay close, because the next few minutes uncovered a truth that surprised even them. As they kept writing, they suddenly realized this explanation wasn't simply about today, it was about every quiet feeling that had been building toward this afternoon without them even noticing. The light outside slowly shifted as the afternoon faded into early evening, and with every passing minute, the world around them seemed quieter. Cars continued moving. People continued walking. Conversations carried on as usual. Yet to your soulmate, it felt as though time itself had stepped aside to let this single decision take center stage. Then another unexpected encounter unfolded. An elderly couple walked past hand in hand, smiling at each other with effortless comfort. One of them laughed softly and said, "The best conversations are the ones we almost never had." Those simple words settled deeply in your soulmate's heart. They weren't dramatic. They weren't extraordinary. But somehow they confirmed exactly what had been growing inside all afternoon. There was still time to choose honesty over hesitation. There was still time to explain instead of leaving unanswered questions behind. Before you look away, notice one detail hiding in plain sight. They stopped rewriting their message completely. For the first time all day, they trusted their own heart instead of trying to predict every possible outcome. If this journey is making you wonder how one conversation can change everything, consider sharing this story with someone who believes meaningful connections deserve honest words, and let us know in the comments whether you've ever experienced a moment when silence became impossible to carry. Your story may remind someone else that courage often begins with a single sentence spoken at the right time. Then came the moment that transformed an ordinary afternoon into a memory neither of you would easily forget. They returned to your conversation one final time, copied the words they had written from the note, and carefully read them from beginning to end without changing a single line. There were no dramatic promises. No impossible claims. Just quiet honesty, genuine emotion, and the explanation they had wanted to give from the very beginning. A calm smile slowly appeared across their face, the kind that comes when uncertainty finally gives way to peace. They whispered, "Now they'll know why today mattered." And just as they prepared to let those heartfelt words find their way to you, another notification appeared above your conversation. It wasn't the message they expected. It wasn't from the person they had been thinking about all afternoon. Yet the name on the screen instantly made them pause once again. Their heartbeat quickened, not from fear, but from curiosity. Whoever had reached out seemed to know something about this afternoon that no one else possibly should have known. They looked at the notification, then back at your message, realizing that the next decision would reveal a hidden piece of the story that had remained invisible until this very moment, and that discovery was about to change everything in the most unexpected way imaginable. The notification remained on the screen for several long seconds, almost daring them to ignore it. They finally tapped it open, expecting another ordinary conversation, but instead they found a short message that stopped them completely. "I think there's something you should know before you send that." No explanation. No context. Just one sentence that instantly pulled them into another mystery. Their heartbeat quickened, not because they feared bad news, but because the timing felt almost impossible to dismiss. Who could know they were about to explain everything? And how could anyone sense that this afternoon had become the turning point they had been waiting for? They leaned back, reading the message again and again until they noticed something they had overlooked. The sender wasn't trying to stop them from reaching out. They were encouraging them to understand one final piece of the puzzle first. Stay with this, because what happened over the next few minutes reshaped every assumption they had made. The conversation that followed wasn't dramatic or emotional, it was remarkably calm. The sender simply reminded them of something they had forgotten in the rush of emotions: people don't remember perfect words. They remember honest ones. That single thought lifted an invisible pressure from their shoulders. Suddenly, they no longer felt responsible for saying everything flawlessly. They only wanted to say what was real. If this story has kept you wondering what comes next, consider sharing it with someone who believes that the right words often arrive at exactly the right time, and leave a comment about the moment that has surprised you the most so far. Sometimes another person's perspective becomes part of the story in ways we never expect. With renewed confidence, your soulmate stepped outside once more. The evening air felt different now, lighter, almost welcoming. The golden sunlight stretched across the sidewalks as if the day itself wasn't quite ready to end. They noticed details they had completely missed earlier: children laughing in the distance, leaves gently moving with the breeze, and strangers exchanging smiles without knowing how meaningful those ordinary moments could become. For the first time all afternoon, they weren't replaying old doubts. They were imagining new possibilities. Then they quietly spoke the words they had been afraid to admit even to themselves: "I don't want another day to pass without telling them the truth." The sentence sounded simple, yet it carried weeks of unspoken emotion. There was one final realization waiting just beyond that thought. They understood that explanations aren't meant to erase the past. They're meant to open a door that has remained closed for too long. Before you look away, notice the smallest detail of all: they stopped checking whether the message sounded impressive. They only checked whether it sounded sincere. That tiny shift changed everything. What happened next didn't feel rushed anymore. It felt intentional, steady, and surprisingly peaceful, as though every uncertain moment from this afternoon had quietly led them to this exact place. As twilight settled over the horizon, your soulmate looked at the screen one last time. No more edits. No more hesitation. Just one slow breath and a quiet smile that hadn't appeared on their face in a very long time. They finally pressed the button they had been afraid to touch all afternoon. The message was gone, no longer trapped inside unfinished thoughts. It was on its way, carrying every honest feeling they had chosen not to hide anymore. Instead of anxiety, an unexpected sense of relief washed over them. They realized the hardest part had never been explaining what happened this afternoon, it had been finding the courage to believe the truth deserved to be shared. They slipped the phone into their pocket and looked up at the evening sky, feeling as though a chapter had gently closed while another was just beginning. But before the moment could fully settle, the phone vibrated almost immediately. An incoming response appeared far sooner than they had imagined. They stared at the glowing screen, their smile fading into quiet anticipation as they whispered, "I wasn't expecting an answer this quickly." Whatever those first few words said, they carried the power to transform not only the rest of this evening, but everything that would follow from this unforgettable afternoon. The reply appeared so quickly that, for a brief moment, they simply stared at the glowing screen without opening it. The world around them seemed to fade into the background. The sounds of passing cars softened. Conversations nearby became distant echoes. Everything narrowed to those few unread words waiting patiently behind the notification. They took one slow breath, then another, as though trying to prepare for something they had imagined 100 different ways but never truly expected. When they finally opened the message, they didn't find anger. They didn't find confusion. Instead, the first sentence was unexpectedly calm, "Thank you for finally telling me." Those 6 words instantly dissolved a weight they had carried much longer than they had realized. Stay with this, because the next few moments revealed something neither of you could have predicted. As they continued reading, they noticed every sentence carried understanding rather than judgment. The explanation they had feared would create distance had done the opposite. It had opened a conversation that had been waiting quietly beneath the surface for far too long. Their hands were still trembling, but now it wasn't from uncertainty. It was from relief. They looked toward the evening sky, smiled to themselves, and whispered, "I almost let another day pass without saying any of this." That realization alone made this afternoon unforgettable. As the conversation continued, something remarkable happened. Neither of you tried to revisit every misunderstanding or search for someone to blame. Instead, both of you began discovering the pieces of the story that had never been shared before. Your soulmate admitted that this afternoon had forced them to confront questions they had avoided for months. Why had they assumed silence was safer than honesty? Why had they convinced themselves that explaining their heart would only make things more complicated? Every answer uncovered another layer of truth. The more openly they spoke, the lighter they felt. Then came one sentence that caught them completely off guard. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't poetic. It simply read, "I wish we had talked like this sooner." Those quiet words stayed with them long after they finished reading. Before you scroll away, there's another important detail you haven't noticed yet. The explanation that began this afternoon was no longer just about one event. It had become the beginning of a completely different kind of connection, one built on patience, honesty, and the courage to stop hiding behind assumptions. Every message that followed felt easier than the last, as though both hearts had finally found the rhythm they had been searching for all along. Then, just when the evening seemed ready to settle into peaceful conversation, another unexpected moment quietly arrived. Your soulmate noticed the time and smiled, realizing that only a few hours earlier they had believed this afternoon would end with unanswered questions. Instead, It had become the afternoon they would remember whenever they needed proof that one honest decision can change everything. They gently set the phone down, not because the conversation was over, but because for the first time they no longer felt the need to rush. There was confidence where uncertainty had once lived. There was hope where hesitation had quietly lingered. Yet before the night could fully unfold, one final message appeared at the bottom of the conversation. It was shorter than all th.